to.
Okay.
We have begun.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Greetings from Maryland.
Greetings from Maui.
I realize I never say my name when I say greetings, so
What is your name?
I'm Jen Andoy. Thanks for asking. How about you, young lady?
I'm Camila Dozier. Well, I think sometimes our names are on the screen and sometimes it's not.
Oh, got
This
it.
whole thing is very new to us, but thank you for joining us on Hidden Treasure Conversations.
Well, it's I know that we had talked about what today might look like, and I know that God really put it on your heart to speak specifically about something that it's more than just a journey. It's like a lifelong discussion that had a crux in your life at a certain point. And we just want to be able to be somebody that can glean from what you're about to share. I know what you're about to share is really vulnerable. So I want to thank you for your courage to share. I know God has put it on your heart, and this is a story that He wrote and He's writing with you. And we're just glad that you're willing to talk about something very important and dear to you and in your life and your family's life. So just want to open it up to you.
Thanks, Jen. I feel like I'm a big movie buff. Like that's how my family bonded was watching TV and movies. And so I always love epic stories like Lord of the Rings and Rocky and like these sagas where like the bad guy and the good guy and the good guy's down and you know what I mean? Like I just love redemption stories. And so I see my life as this epic saga where God is the hero. And for most of my life, I didn't see my life in such a beautiful way at all. And I want to share the story of my second son, Zion. I want to share the rescue that God did through this very, very painful experience of losing Zion. But before I share that, I really want to first ask, am I super glitchy? Because I'm glitchy on my side.
Yeah, but your voice isn't.
No, okay.
Yeah.
God, I'm praying that you will remove the glitchy. Um, okay, so I want to share first the background to the event. So my background is before the age of 8, I was sexually abused, sexually molested by at least 3 different people, all close people to my family, all people that I trusted and we trusted. And the thing about it was, these were not recovered memories or anything. I remembered them all. But because of the damage that sexual abuse does, I became promiscuous very young. I don't remember the first like consensual sexual experience I had because it's all muddied in my brain. And so for the most part, for most of my life until I really came to know God, I just thought that I was promiscuous when I was like 5. I didn't connect. I was in deep denial about what had happened to me. Now, to take it back even further, I was one of 3 children born to my parents who stayed together for just short of 20 years. And my parents loved us, but they were both emotionally ill equipped to really deal with life in a healthy way. We were a good Christian family by all accounts. We went to church every Sunday. My parents, we listened to Christian music in the house. They didn't drink, they didn't curse, they didn't smoke, they didn't, do drugs, or they seemed like that typical, like, oh, those are good Christian people. But they didn't really know how to invite God and Jesus into their daily life, into the movements of their heart.
Mhm.
And I learned from both of my parents not to process emotions, not to deal. They
Mhm.
were kind of in this fantasy land. I always felt such a strain and a distance between the two of them, but they never argued. There was never any like outward, aggression or craziness in our family. We were like the elephant in the room kind of family. Everything is fine, even when it's not. And it wasn't. We had our dysfunction just like every other family. or most families. So I grew up feeling emotionally neglected, but I didn't know that as I was growing up. You just grow up and you think your family's normal. So having that feeling like distant from especially my mom. So my mom just was very shut down emotionally. And she was like superwoman to me. Like she could handle anything. She went to school for her master's and her PhD. She became an elementary school teacher. She taught me everything I knew about sports. She was my coach. She was my cheerleader. She was like, made sure the homework is done. The vegetables were eaten, or at least as far as she knew they were eaten. I mean, she did it all. So I really looked up to her and I literally thought she could do no wrong. But what I sensed was a distance, a sadness in her that I could never reach. And I remember being just 7 years old and feeling like she didn't wanna know me and she didn't wanna be known. And that's a pretty heavy thing for like a 7-year-old to intuit about her mom. Now, to this day, I know that that's probably not true, but that's how I processed her emotional state. I took it personally and I thought it was about me. I thought I wasn't good enough for her to want to know me. And I thought, well, I'm going to be good enough one day. I remember thinking that like one day she's going to want to know me and one day she's going to let me inside. And I set about trying to make that happen for the rest of my life, earning love, earning acceptance. Okay, so then that was doubly compounded by the sexual abuse. So I don't know, it's difficult to explain what happens to someone who experiences childhood sexual abuse because you don't have the processing skills of an adult. But for me, it was like my world just broke into a thousand shattered pieces. And the regular world that everybody else was living in with my brother and my sister in school and sports and TV and all of that, that still kept going. And I was still walking through it, but without my heart. It was like my heart got left into this dark world where I felt so dirty, like the kind of dirty that could never be washed off. Deep in my soul, I felt unlovable. I felt unworthy and that no one would ever know me or love me. That happened because I internalized the abuse. I wasn't able to say, hey, that was something weird that happened to me. No, no. I thought, this is me. I am broken. I am dirty. I am unworthy. And I told no one.
Wow.
And so the abuse continued to happen over time with different people, which only taught me that lesson more and more. And I want to share this one story. I was 13, I was in eighth grade, and I was one of very few Black people at my school. It was a mostly white and Asian school and very affluent. And we were not affluent. We were like lower middle class. My parents, my mom was a teacher and my dad worked in finance. So we weren't like super, super struggling or anything, but we definitely weren't in the economic bracket of the people that I went to school with. We were on scholarships at the school. So in eighth grade, all the boys and girls are like going together, whatever that means. And no one was going with me. And I'm sure there were many girls who felt that way too. But I thought it was me, just personally me. Like, I'm not pretty enough. I don't look like the other girls. I'm not wonderful enough. No one chose me. So this was like the constant assault on my heart. And this is as a child. Now, by the end of the year, this one boy asked me to go on a date with him and his friend. And his friend liked my best friend. So it would be a double date to Disneyland. And I was so ecstatic. Someone had finally chosen me. I was just like, oh, felt so good. I never stopped to ask myself if I had chosen him. But who was I to choose anyone at that time? I just was so happy to be picked, to be wanted. Now, I remember my mom took me out and I got my hair did and I got this cute little outfit with this poofy red shirt and my white shorts. And I just felt like a princess. They picked us up in a limousine. I mean, this is how some of these people were rolling. And we went to Disneyland and I was just so excited. I felt so special until the first ride on the Pirates of the Caribbean. And my date, I didn't understand why he wanted to ride separately. And it was like a super empty day at Disneyland for some reason. So we got our own boat. And I didn't understand until we went into the darkness of the ride and he started to do things to me that I didn't want. And I just went numb and I didn't tell him to stop because I didn't realize I had a choice. And I was so humiliated and embarrassed. I was so angry at myself for thinking that I was worth more than this. When I look back, I can see the enemy just waiting and whispering in my ear like, "How stupid of you to think you were a princess. I bet you won't do that again," right? You remember your place. You remember what you're worth. Now, I had already learned really well to push down any negative feelings. And so I didn't say anything for the whole day at Disneyland. I just was shut down. I barely remember anything else that happened that day. I just know I barely spoke and I put on a little fake smile, but I felt so devastated and humiliated. And that was one of many experiences where Satan taught me my place and I agreed with him that I was worthless, that I was unlovable, that I was trash. That was 8th grade. So, fast forward, I spend a life trying to fake worthiness by being good. I got great grades. I was a national merit scholar in high school and college. I was a athlete at my school. Um, I made it into newspaper articles. I was the kid that did everything right. Like, oh, I obey, or at least I make you think I do. Like everything perfect on the outside, but
Yeah.
my heart was dying inside. I never, ever was honest with anyone, including myself or even my friends, about the pain and confusion that was going on inside. In my life, in my teens and my early 20s, I really tried to use men for my sense of security. That was my main way. Like if somebody liked me, if somebody called me theirs, then that was something. At least I was worth that. Then see, I'm valuable to somebody, right? But the men that I called into my life only treated me the way I felt about myself. And I didn't realize it then, but I hated myself.
Mm,
I really hated her.
yeah.
I hated that weak little girl who couldn't function, who was confused, who was so needy. I hated her. I wanted her to die. I was not aware of this. This was something that was the undercurrent of me. So I pulled men into my life who didn't respect me. And
Mm,
even those who think or thought they loved me or had affection or feelings for me could not value me. So those relationships lasted a long time because it's what I felt about myself. And I
yeah.
found myself in dysfunctional, broken relationship after relationship where I felt so rejected by this person. Um, okay. I also used sex really early on, and I didn't understand why. That was another thing that made me feel really dirty, but I continued to use it. And looking back, I saw that I used sexual immorality with men as a way to feel powerful over the abuse. This is all going on in my subconscious. Like, I'm not going to identify with that weak little girl. I'm going to be the aggressor. I'm going to be the pursuer. I'm going to be the independent, strong sexual being.
Mhm,
But that actually wasn't what I felt like.
mm,
I was lying to myself about what sex was. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't feel loved or cherished. It was just a moment where one person was choosing me. But honestly, I could have been anyone to most of those people. There was never a shortage of boys or men who were willing to participate. And I left myself feeling even more used and disregarded than before. So, this was my pattern of years and
mm,
years and years. I became a teacher. I kind of fell into teaching. Special education is always an area where they need teachers. And right out of college, I had no aim in my life. I didn't have any sense of value. So I didn't have any goals. Why would I set goals for someone who has no value? So it was kind of like path of least resistance. My mom was a teacher and she was amazing, and it was definitely in me, but it was really like, I guess I could substitute. That's easy, you know? And I did, and they were looking for a full-time special ed teacher, and I took the job. And it was overwhelming and crazy at first because I didn't know what I was doing, but I was a natural. It was what I was born to do. What I was drawn to was working with kids with special needs, especially this particular child I worked with. My classes were students who had learning disabilities. So you couldn't really see, like, if you talk to them, you wouldn't know, oh, this kid has a learning disability, right? A lot of them were really interesting and funny, and they all had these like stories. This was a fourth through sixth grade class. Really cool, interesting, crazy classroom. Three subs had already come and gone within the first 3 weeks of school. They couldn't keep someone in there. But, I remember the first day, I was like, they were running around, someone tried to light someone's hair on fire, someone was about to cut someone's ear, like, and I was like, "Put the scissors down." I was like, "I don't have scissors." Like, it was just a crazy environment, and I remember at one point I was like, "You guys are acting like children." And this one little boy goes, "I'm as a children." And then he kept running around. Anyway, so it started out crazy, but I found my home there. And I was drawn to loving these kids who thought themselves worthless, thought themselves unintelligent, thought themselves like they didn't belong. And what I see now is that was me. Like, I was drawn to take care of them and to uplift them and to believe in them and to encourage them to succeed and show them their worth. And I was doing that because that's what I deep down wanted someone to do for me all my life. Anyways, but what was funny about that is I really was an amazing teacher. I feel like that's a gift God gave me, but I couldn't see it. I felt inferior as a teacher because I didn't have a credential. I felt like I had snuck in the back door and I was just waiting for someone to be like, "What are you doing here?" Like, I always felt I avoided the teacher's lounge. I avoided other people. I was so terrified in my life just of being around other people, so afraid of judgment and rejection, not realizing it was coming from myself.
Mm.
So
Well,
I remember those years and I would get so many accolades and so many like crazy supportive encouraging responses from parents, from students themselves, from my principal, from friends who visited the classroom. People would tell me like, "I've never seen a teacher like this." Like, but I couldn't believe any of it. It never stuck. I never owned it. I never said, "This is true about me. I have a talent, I have a skill." Because I deep down the only truth I knew was that I was worthless. So I eventually got to a point where you can't teach on an emergency permit forever. You have to actually go to school and be in the process of doing that. But I couldn't sustain that. I didn't believe in myself. So even though I started those processes a few times, I could never finish because in my head, I'm a failure. In my head, I'm not like other people who can achieve things. I'm some broken, fake, false person that doesn't really belong here. So I ended up just getting out of teaching just because wasn't able to do what was required to keep the job. And I ended up saying like, "Oh, I don't like the paperwork and I don't like this." But honestly, I had a hard time just basically living. I remember in college one day having to go to the bank and the supermarket, and that was like the heaviest load. And I just stayed in bed after that.
mm,
I was becoming more and more depressed, but
yeah.
I didn't understand what depression was. And I was in denial about my own pain. So I never thought, this isn't normal. Like, let's get some help. I never had those kinds of conversations, even with myself.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's my background. I was pretty lonely, isolated. I had two friends in my life at that point. I didn't like to be around people. It was just terrifying. I was exhausted a lot, just doing normal daily things. And I was very miserable, but I wasn't honest with myself about any of it. So that was my life before the year 2002. Now, my sister, my baby sister, had become a true follower of Jesus, maybe about 4 years before. And I had visited her church and I thought they were all weirdos. Um, but I also thought there was something cool sometimes. Like, what is this? It was men and women in their 20s and 30s and 40s who were really living out the Bible, like really seeking God in their everyday life with their hearts, with their souls, like actually holding each other accountable to what the Bible says and really coming to have a real relationship with Jesus Christ. And that was just something I had never seen. And when I would visit, there was like real love in the room. And that was also something I had never seen. And even though there was something special about it, I was also very put off by it. Because I refused to be vulnerable. And so vulnerability was very strange for me. So one day, God spoke to me, and I had stopped hanging around my sister and her church because I just thought, that's enough of that. But out of my mouth came, I want to be around people who really love God. Now, as soon as the thought came out, I was like, what? Seemed foreign to me. It was like someone else spoke it. And my mom was like, well, you should pray about that. Now, at this point in my life, I still believed in God, but I had rejected Jesus. I was like, I don't get what Jesus is. How is that real? I didn't understand. Even though I'd been in Sunday school my whole life growing up,
Uh,
I
yeah,
didn't I didn't really know Jesus or what he was about, which is so interesting, isn't it?
yeah.
And I definitely didn't believe the Bible anymore. I was like, oh, I don't like organized religion and God is everywhere. And I don't, organized religion is just human nonsense um, and so that's where I was. But that night with my sister and this woman who shared her story with me, she shared her story. It was full of pain and full of vulnerability. And I was like, a deer stuck in headlights. And
Mm,
her story was so similar to my story, but I was like speechless. I couldn't respond.
mm,
But I was also deeply moved. And that night, tearfully, I asked my sister for help for the first time, probably in over 10 years. I never asked for help.
mm,
I was so uncomfortable being in a vulnerable position. And so she asked me what I was looking for. And I said, I'm searching for truth. And she said, I think you're searching for God. If you're looking for truth, then you're looking for God, and you don't have to do it alone.
mm,
So she and other women studied the Bible with me, and I came to fall in love with God and with Jesus. Through the book of John, I fell in love with Jesus and I met him for the first time for real in my life. And he sat with me and he cuddled with me and he came to me and his love just poured out to me through the word of the God. And I was baptized on September 24th of 2002. It was the best day of my life. It was amazing. And I finally didn't need a man. I was like, I found the man I've been looking for my whole life. It was Jesus. It was God, you know. Um, but the honeymoon with God started to fade over time because the wounds of my past
mhm.
were covering over the truth of his love and his
Yeah.
heart for me. I still was plagued with this deep sense of insecurity and shame and fear and condemnation. I often even wondered, am I still even a Christian? Did my baptism really work? Because I don't feel like a new creation. Like, where is the abundant life he promised? And I wasn't mad at God like he let me down. I was mad at me, like something's so wrong with me.
Mm,
And I worried that God was just like, ugh, after everything I've done for this girl, she's still just like that all the time. I struggled with pornography. I struggled with relationships. Like, I longed for deep relationships with women in my church who were amazing, but I couldn't do the work of being vulnerable and investing and risking my heart. I was so afraid of the judgment and the condemnation from other people. So I would like try to get relationship, but also push people away and decide that they were unsafe. And so many people were unsafe for me. So over the years, I tried to be a good Christian. I led the preteens with my now husband that God gave me. I didn't even want him. God was like, "This is for you. This is for you." I was like, "I already have a man. I'm good enough. I've got Jesus." I was finally not trying to have a man. And he's like, "Here's the one." And it was beautiful, by the way. Our courtship was absolutely beautiful. It was a fairy tale. And we had our first kiss on our wedding day, which for me was such a
Mm,
beautiful gift from God. My husband, this man, was saying, "You are so precious. I will wait for you." And I'd never experienced a pure relationship with a man before. So we were married in 2004. Now, here we are. We're both baby Christians. We both have abusive backgrounds that we haven't really dealt with. So getting married was like a disaster. After a few months, we both were like, check, please. We did not know how to communicate. Our particular wounds and our particular ways of coping were like each other's buttons. So
yep.
like he grew up in a wild abusive kind of background. So he just wanted to avoid conflict. Like that was peace for him. And I grew up in the crazy silence. So I was like, I'm fighting to be seen and heard. So we're both shadow boxing our past and wounding each other in the present. And we did not know how to deal. Luckily, God helped us, and we took this great course called Dynamic Marriage, and it helped lay a good foundation. But for years, I felt super lonely in my marriage. I was just fighting for him to see me and hear me. And he was always feeling like nothing he did was good enough.
Mm,
I couldn't hear him say that. All I heard was that he didn't care. I couldn't see that I needed him to be perfect so I could feel safe.
yeah.
I needed him to be great all the time
Yeah.
and to be like, okay, Camila, like all the time so I could feel worthy. I wanted him to fill that gaping
Yeah.
hole in my soul. And it was something no man or other human could ever do, only God could do. Okay, so that's the background. So I'm a
Mm,
Christian, but I'm not walking in victory. I'm not more than a conqueror. I'm still chained deep
mm,
inside, but I don't even have the language to understand any of this. I'm
right.
just miserable a lot. I get sick all the time and miss church. And I'm so happy that I get sick because I get to not be around people. I have an excuse to just stop, to get off the hamster wheel of trying to perform
Mm,
without my heart. Okay, so that was
wow.
40 years of my life. So now, then that's when something happened that changed me forever. Okay, so where are we? Where are we on time? How are we doing?
Oh, we have at least 30
Okay.
more minutes, and this is
Okay.
great. This is great.
Okay.
Every
So,
every woman right now, and even man listening, they're gonna relate so much. There's so much what you're talking about that people feel, and that's their world inside that no one else knows. So keep talking, please.
okay, thanks, Jenny.
Mm,
Okay, so July 18th, 2013, Tori and I have our second son, Zion.
mhm,
And he's beautiful. He's a sweet, sweet soul. He looks like his daddy. So precious. And oh, his eyes just, they take you to heaven. What we didn't know was that he was born with a rare disease called pulmonary hypertension. The strange thing was he was completely asymptomatic, sorry. So we didn't know. The doctors didn't know. Nobody knew. And the only thing about him is he would sleep a lot. And every once in a while I'd be like, is he seems like a really sleepy baby. But no other issues. So we made every doctor's appointment. There were no other signs until the fifth month when we took him in for something and the doctor said, you need to take him to Children's Hospital immediately. We didn't find out that he had this disease until 6 days before he passed. And those 6 days in the hospital were very difficult. I was in shock and I think on the first day, I made peace. I'd never seen anything like what I was seeing. He had a team of like 12 doctors constantly bustling around him. They later told us he was the sickest child in the hospital. We were just aflush. We did not know. It was just a whirlwind, as you can imagine. But by the end of the first day, I had made peace that he wasn't going to make it. I had never seen anything like this. What was strange was God whispered to me, I didn't tell you that. After I said that to myself, and I thought, what? On the third day, God gave me a clear vision of Jesus Christ. The vision was ablaze in white light. He was riding on horses with him and his army, like riding with a vengeance, with a fury, like I'm coming. And he was riding on clouds, like, and he was coming and he said, I'm coming in 3 days. My. I took this to mean that he was coming to save Zion in 3 days. On that third day, so it's day 6 of the hospital, Zion is going to undergo a risky procedure that they recommended was the only course of action at this point. Pulmonary hypertension is incurable and it's highly fatal. So we got advice and we said yes to the risky procedure. That morning, I had a foreboding sense in my soul that I did not like. And so I sat and I said, God, did I make that vision up or did you send it to me? I just asked him, and he sent it to me again, the exact same vision. I saw it again. Jesus coming on white horses in a fury, clouds of thunder. I'm coming. So he showed me the vision again. And I said, okay, great. Okay, he's coming, right? And I again take it to mean he's going to save Zion today. So we go to the hospital. On the way to the hospital, okay, so in the house, a famous song plays, Break Every Chain. And I don't like it. I don't like that this song, I know that it's God speaking to me and I don't like it. It's like the wrong song. Like, I don't like it. Then on the way to the hospital, the same song comes on the radio. And I'm like, no, like, I got my vision. But Zion died that day, shortly after the procedure. It was really hard to watch. They gave him CPR for must have been 15, 20 minutes. But I saw his spirit leave his body and I knew he was not there. And it was so painful to watch. And I prayed that they would stop. My mom was there, my husband was there, our whole family was in the hospital and we grieved Zion. I couldn't properly grieve him at that moment. My husband could, and he held him for a long time and he spoke to him. And I'm glad he did. The little me inside of me, though, was terrified and running away already. I went home that night and we were so empty without our Zion. And I asked God, why did you give me that vision? Why did you give me that vision? I felt so stupid because I had told my husband and I had convinced him too. And when the doctors pulled us aside after the procedure and told us that he probably wasn't going to make it through the day, I told them they were wrong. And they looked at me like I was crazy, but I had faith. But Zion did pass. And I asked God, like, I don't understand. And in that moment, God was so graceful. And he just whispered to me, I did come. I did save him. And in my soul, I understood that he was saying, I saved him from this world. I saved him from the suffering that he was in. And he's with Jesus now. And I can picture him sitting on Jesus's lap, free of pain, free of worry. Oh, I think of what he was going through physically, especially in that last month and the last 6 days. And I was grateful that God took away his pain. And that gave me peace in that moment. And I was at peace with God about it. There were many months of wrestling to come, but in that moment, I understood and I was glad my son wasn't suffering. But what I didn't know then and what I know now is that vision of Jesus riding on clouds, riding with a vengeance, riding to save. That vision was for me. He was coming for me. He was going to pull up all the weeds in my garden that was choking off my life. He was going to rescue me from the choking darkness I had lived in my whole life. He was coming to break every chain. And that's exactly what he did. So, fast forward maybe a month, I would say for a few weeks, I was filled with peace. I wasn't on the floor. I wasn't angry. My husband went through those very normal emotions in the first few weeks, but I really didn't. I felt a joy and like I felt connected with God, and I was, I it just, and part of that was very real and a gift, but part of it was a part of the way I had learned to live, which is like you live in the good and you don't really deal with the bad. Um, and I thought being a good Christian meant not falling apart, right? Being faithful, being joyful. But God had other plans. So fast forward about a month, maybe 3 weeks after Zion passed, and I'm sinking into a depression. And this time it's one that I can't save myself from. No scripture, no prayer could save me from it. I sat on the sofa and I would just look out the window for hours and I could feel myself sinking, sinking, sinking. And one day my husband he works for Redbox, the movie company. And so he could bring home movies and we'd watch them from time to time. And he happened to bring home this movie called Home Run. And I didn't know at the time, but it's a Celebrate Recovery movie
Mm,
produced by that ministry. So
mm,
I put it on and I'm watching it, and the Spirit of God is moving in my soul. And it is speaking to me so clearly. This is what you need. So the next day, I Googled it and I found a Celebrate Recovery. And I found one close to me and I left a message. But then I found another one a little further away and they picked up. So I went to that meeting and there were only like two or three people here there in a big room and it was really weird and it was just not really, I don't know, it just didn't feel right. And I was sitting there and it was odd. And I said, "Okay, God, I'm going to give you 10 minutes to tell me to stay cuz this don't seem like where you want me to be." 10 minutes, nothing happens. I'm out of there. I'm driving home and I get a call from the leader of the first CR that was close to me, the first cell recovery. His name was Scott. Oh, thankful for Scott. And I just like start tentatively telling him through tears, like, I feel so lost and raw. I lost my son. I feel at peace about it, but he starts to explain to me, it's God's love and wisdom speaking to me, that traumas of the present often create these through lines to the deep, unhealed traumas of the past.
mm,
And he knew. It was God. He knew that's what was happening to me. Now, as soon as he was speaking to me on that call, I knew this is where I needed to be. So I went there, I think it was the very next day or 2 days later, and I crawled into that Celebrate Recovery on my hands and knees. Like, you know, losing Zion broke me in half in a way that nothing else ever would have. And when I broke, all I was left with was that broken, shattered girl that I had hidden away all those years ago and built this new Camila, that the one that faces the world around her. Well, that one, I didn't have the energy to sustain in this kind of pain. So all that was left was the little girl who had never seen the light of day. And it was her who crawled into the Celebrate Recovery, and it was so good. There, I found Jesus again. Celebrate Recovery. I went to the one in La Crescenta, California. So I'm recommending that if anyone wants to know. I found people who weren't trying to measure up and who weren't, they were just themselves, broken people reaching for the hem of Jesus's garment. And that's all I was. And I relearned what it meant that Jesus came for the sick. I
Mm.
was sick. I was sick, and he was there for me. I was broken, like so broken, but still loved and wanted by God. And it was there that God began to rebuild me. I soon joined a 12-step program, and it's like a small group within the Celebrate Recovery. And it was a special group for survivors of sexual abuse. It was very raw. And it was there that I began the work of my recovery. And it was through Celebrate Recovery and also therapy at the time that I started to learn to feel my feelings for the first time in my life. I
Wow.
started to learn that the sexual abuse and the emotional neglect of my young childhood was informing everything about my life, even how I was grieving my son. I wouldn't give myself permission to break down and grieve him.
Mm.
I was judging myself and saying I needed to be better, stronger, faithful, you know? And I just shed all of that. And through CR, you do an inventory, a life inventory, and God began to show me every wound, every hurt, every pain that I had been through that I had buried. And it was like I was looking at myself and all the wounds of my lifetime. And when wounds aren't healed, they fester and pus, and they get infected. And so that's what I was looking at. That's who I was. And I had been trying to pretend all these years. I finally just got to be me. And God sat with me through every moment. He guided me and whispered to me. He let me cry. He let me scream. He said, he didn't say, "Hey, suck it up. Be stronger than this. What's wrong with you?" No, he said, "Here, my precious." He held me and he bottled up every tear. He told me that I was broken and precious at the same time. And I had never imagined that I could be both. So through that process, I learned some amazing things. The first thing I learned, my favorite moment, I think, I was filling out my inventory and I was writing about the different sexual abuses, the different assaults. And there's a column for every time you feel hurt or pain. There's a column for your part. What's your responsibility? And for the sexual abuse, I got to write the words, "not guilty." And it was the first time that I allowed myself to say, I had no part in this. I had no responsibility. It was not my choice. It was not my fault.
Right.
And it is not my burden.
Right.
So I got to shed the lie of the shame of the abuse. As Jesus told Lazarus, I got to take off my grave clothes.
Mm.
They started not fitting anymore. Another thing I learned was that even though I had been through so many painful things in my life, feeling neglected and hurt and disregarded and not seen and not loved by all these different people in big ways and in really small ways, maybe something someone said to me one day, even though those things had happened, the most damaging wounds were the wounds that I had given myself.
Yeah.
With every painful thing, with every trauma, with every hurt, Satan had whispered these lies to me about what it meant about me. And I agreed with him. I agreed with him that I was worthless. I agreed with him that I was trash. I agreed with him that I was unlovable. And worst of all, the most pervasive lie that ruled my life was that I was utterly alone
Mm.
and that no one would ever be there for me.
Wow.
And so God began to break the chains of every one of these lies. And he showed me through this work that it was me who abandoned me, that it was me who said I was a whore, that it was me who said that I was worthless. And that's the thing that I carried with me. That's the thing that left me in fear and shame my whole life. That's the thing that made me feel like life was a cold, dark, barren place. And all I needed to do was try and survive. So God began remaking me. I started speaking out about what had happened to me, to my parents, to my friends. I mean, at first it was like, ooh, but then I was like, no, this is me. This is true. This is really what happened. And it's not mine to hide. I have
Mm,
nothing to hide.
mm,
Started sharing with everyone.
mm,
Um, I started being honest with my mom and my dad about hurts from the past. I shed the good girl. I stopped trying to be the good girl. I stopped trying to make the peace. I
mm,
used to never let myself get angry because anger is not lovable. So that was off the table. It was always like, what do I need to do to make someone feel comfortable with me and to make someone feel loved so that I can feel safe and I can feel loved? I stopped doing that. So I started having some hard conversations with my dad and my mom, and they didn't go well sometimes, and that was new for our family. We had the
mm,
elephant in the room family. We were like, everything is fine. And I had anger and I had resentment, and we worked through those things. And I'm grateful that my parents were willing to listen, even if they didn't always understand, and even if I wasn't being full of grace. And some of those conversations we terminated and we had to go revisit. But God rebuilt those relationships and made them new. And now I feel like my mom and my dad are two of my favorite people.
mm,
I don't hold anything over them. I would say about 2 years ago, I was filled with such an inexpressible joy of all that God had forgiven in me. And out of that joy, I wrote a letter to my parents. I said, I can only imagine what you must feel knowing that your daughter was sexually abused. And I want to say, I forgive you for not knowing. I forgive you for not seeing. If you knew more, you would have done more. And if you knew better, you would have done better. I know you loved me. I release you. I pray you release yourselves. And I spoke life over them of who they were and how beautiful they are and how so many parts of me are their goodness from God, you know? I was able to do that. Not only that, but God had me go back and talk to every person that I had not been open and honest with over the last like 10, 12 years of my life. And these talks were embarrassing sometimes. It was like, remember 8 years ago when you said this? Like, so embarrassing. But what I had no idea was that God rebuilt out of those talks some amazing connections and friendships that I never would have even believed were possible. God was remaking my past. I do want to say, because I skipped over it, one of the most precious things about this work that God did with me was that He reunited me with my little girl. He took me through the wounds and the traumas of the pain. He walked me back through that world and He healed every moment. And then He took me and we found that little girl, that terrified, abandoned girl. And He showed me how to love her. He showed me that she was precious. He showed me her pain and how not to judge her for it. He showed me how to pick her up and love her and kiss her. And we became one. He reunited me with myself without the shame, without the judgment. He taught me how to love myself. And that was such a miraculous morning. I remember everything about that day. Whew. Hold on, I'm going to take a little water. I feel like I'm forgetting something important. Okay. Oh yeah. So this healing process didn't happen over a week or a month. This happened over a few years and it was stages. And I was dealing with a lot of PTSD that I never knew I had, which explained all the panic and anxiety I had around people. And um And one morning, oh, one glorious morning, God started singing a song over me in my sleep. And when I would wake up, because I'm a morning person, I'm not a night person, I'd wake up at like 4 and spend time with him. He would tell me, put this song on. Like he would just put it in my brain, like, let's go.
Mm.
And so he had me listening to it for weeks, but one morning, it was a very special morning. I could feel it. And I laid down my little futon thingy on the floor. That was my special place with him. And I would imagine I was up high on this beautiful cliff with the water and the dolphins below. And he would just come and meet me there. And so I was there and I was listening to this song, um, Reckless Love. I feel like that's not what it's called. Is that what it's called, Jen?
Well, yes, I think so.
Okay. And he starts singing it over me. And I'm going to sing this one part. It's like,
Mm.
no, shoot. I knew I was going to mix up the words. It's like, no mountain you won't climb up. No, something you won't. Oh, no, I don't remember. No lie you won't tear down. Wall you won't kick down. Coming after me. No shadow you won't light up. Mountain you won't climb up. Coming after me. And it's just like pouring over me. And he gives me this vision of him, like larger than any mountain, like scaling mountains in one single step, coming for me, coming after me, kicking down walls. And he gives me a vision of him looking at me, and I'm a little tiny baby in a crib, and he's looking at me with complete love. And in these visions, and as this song's pouring over me, he's telling me, there's nothing I wouldn't do for you. And that's never not been true. I've always planned to rescue you. You've always been precious. You've never, ever been alone. And I'm just like weeping because it's not just a conversation we're having. God is literally remaking the wounds of my past. He's literally breaking these chains that have imprisoned me my whole life. And I'm filled with this peace and joy where panic and fear used to reign in my life. The relationship that I have now with God is so intimate because in my worst, at my worst, He loved me perfectly, unconditionally. He was for me at my worst. And now the love that I had for him, it wasn't just in my head, like the love that I knew of him. I always knew after I became a Christian, I always knew the Bible is true and God is good, but I didn't know it in my heart because my heart was telling me other things, the
Yes.
lies I had believed, but now they were gone. And so his love could go all the way down. And now I'm living from that place of love. Oh my gosh. So what else can I say? It's amazing. I don't compare myself to other women who seem to have it more together than I anymore.
Mm.
I I don't look for validation from my husband to tell me what I'm worth, and
Mm.
I'm beginning to be able to love him for who he is and not for who I wish he would be. Um, oh, I'm not I'm not guided by fear and condemnation anymore. I'm on guard for it. I fight against it and I actually win because God is with me. And with God with me, who can be against me? These scriptures that I've always loved and have always inspired me, they've taken root in my heart and everything is changing. I had a moment with God one morning where he said, "Hey, come here. I want to show you something. I want to heal you." And he whisked me up to heaven and I got to hold Zion. I got to hold him as a little baby. And then I got to sit with him by the grass of this beautiful lake. And I got to be with him at different stages. I got to watch his first step. And I got to hear him say, Mom. I got to hear him say, Mama. And I got to watch him grow. And I just keep that with me. And it's replaced the horror. It's replaced the 6 days in the hospital. God did a miraculous healing in me, and now I'm a woman I don't recognize. So I'm teaching special education at the high school near my house. I'm working on getting my teacher's credential, which is crazy. I believe, it's not that I believe in me, although I do, but it's that I believe in God in me. I
Mm,
believe that He created someone powerful and beautiful and special, and I am valued by the God of the universe. And I know God don't make no junk. I am a powerful woman with a voice, and that's what Satan tried to kill. And what Satan meant for evil, God meant for glory. And I remember once I asked God, well, couldn't you have done this in me without Zion having to pass? Like, you could do anything. And he said, why would I spare your son when I didn't even spare mine? And I was humbled in that moment in the best way. And like, I was reminded of what real love is. And even losing Zion, I wouldn't have written my story this way. I say that a lot. I wouldn't have said, if I could if I could just lose Zion and then I'd be free. Yeah, that's a good plan. I never ever would have said that. But then I think about how God did that and said, I'm going to sacrifice my son so that the world could be free. um, I got to a point where I realized I'm grateful for the abuse,
mm.
because a redemption story, to be able to overcome that, to break free, God has even allowed me to forgive all of my abusers. I used to not be able to say their names.
Wow.
Even after the initial healing, saying their names would bring up so much trauma and so much fear. I hated them and I feared them and I blamed them for all the pain of my life. But God never stops. And He showed me that we are all at the foot of the cross. We are all broken from this broken world. And He showed me that these boys who did this to me were themselves deeply assaulted by this world, deeply wounded. And I long for them to experience the kind of peace and redemption and love and joy that I have now. God is a rescuer. That's who He is. And He doesn't look on any of us and judge us and say, you're bad, you're too bad. Oh gosh. No, that's the opposite of who He is. That's Satan. That's the accuser. And God freed me from that. And I have a fellowship of people like Jen who are always able to remind me when I start to walk down that path of condemnation. But God's put a light in my heart, and all I ever want to do is tell people about what He did, because He did what is absolutely impossible. I am made new from the inside out. From the inside out. I spent my life trying to be on the outside, what I thought God would want or what I thought other people would want. And I'm done with that. I feel so free. I feel like the sky is the limit. And I feel like all the things that a good Christian person is supposed to do, they come out of me. Like, He
Mm.
fills me up with His love and joy, even when I mess up, even when I sin. He loves me incredibly. That kind of love, man, that's the kind that just like spills out. It spills out. And if we could all be filled with His love instead of the fear and condemnation, how changed this world would be. Okay, I think there's so much I want to say, but I just want to take a pause and
Ah,
thank God for what He did.
Cam, this is a story that I mentioned earlier that every person's going to relate to in some way, because I think a lot of us go through life feeling like, what we're doing on the outside, the person we're trying to be on the outside versus who we are in those quiet moments. That's why a lot of us turn to other things, because the quiet reminds them. It's too painful. We have to numb that. And we just keep pushing on that treadmill or that hamster wheel. And we're just like, well, I'm just trying to keep up with all the normal people, we think,
Yes.
we think that they're okay and something's clearly wrong with us. But how do you tell people it's too hard to go to the bank and the grocery store and
Yes.
can't get up? And and you talked a lot about your walk with God even after you became a Christian. You had that initial beautiful relationship with God, Him saving you, washing you clean of your sins. But then you spoke about what life was still like in your inner world, and how it wasn't enough for Jesus just to wash your sins away and make you saved as far as eternally saved, but that there was a life that you weren't living now, and that only Jesus, knowing him on an experiential way of knowing him, not just knowing
Yeah.
his word, but knowing him personally. You're speaking now from a point of view of, I now know this Jesus.
Yeah.
That's because these are the precious moments in my life that he spoke to me, or even surprised me, or what his will was beyond what I could have imagined, and his way was much better, you know. And so now you actually can say, I know Jesus, but it your way of expressing your walk before you came to know Christ, and even after you knew Christ, but then truly knowing him, you know.
Yes.
um, it really does. I think it's going to relate to a lot of people listening, whether they even have a relationship with God or not. They're going to really relate, and those that do, they're also going to relate, because I think it's very easy to live in a world where no one knows the inner pain. And maybe you have a best friend, and maybe you have two, and maybe you're those lucky people that can talk. But there are a lot of people that aren't talking about what you're talking about. And you found, I think it was Scott, you said,
Yeah.
who spoke the language of heart, who understood, and that was a pivotal conversation for you. And I feel like when we can find people that actually have been through a process themselves, and then they can speak the language to you, and that's why someone's story originally spoke to you, you're like, their story really resonates with mine. So sharing our stories, having somebody that we can relate to and hear them and also overcome, gives us hope. Like, well, then maybe, one, I'm not crazy, one, I'm not alone. There's something to this God, and there's certainly something to having a personal relationship to Jesus, and I don't need to do it alone. So I think there's a lot that your story spoke to on all different levels. I've heard your story multiple times. I've been part of your story, and yet even hearing it today, this time, was still very helpful for my own life, even as it is presently. So you said a lot of things. I wish I had paper and pencil nearby, because I was like, oh yeah, that part, that's for me. I need to hear that for
Mm.
me right now, you know. um,
Yes.
so I just want to say thank you to God, obviously, but you being a person that is now who you are, but being so vulnerable and not forgetting your past, so you can actually help others by sharing. And
Mhm.
you shared so powerfully, by the way.
Thank
So I can understand why there's a lot of technical difficulties all this week, because this story is so powerful.
Such a good God, man. Thank you, Jen, for saying all of that. I'm just blown away by God. I wanted to just share because it's so cool that in 2015 we found out we were pregnant. I was 42 or 43. You do the math and you tell me how old I was. But I felt like I was a senior citizen. I was like, God, uh I was really nervous. But we had Lyric on July 12th of the following year. She's 4 now. That's crazy. And Lyric is such a powerful soul, such a beautiful, powerful soul. And she reminds me of the little girl that I once was before the breaking and now am today. And
Mm,
I am so grateful that God used her to bring back so much light and joy into our little family.
mm,
So in 2018, God moved us to Hawaii, which is crazy because for 15 years or 14 years being married to Tori, he always likes to move. He's a risk taker. He's an adventurer. And I was always like, well, have fun. I'll be here in California with my family and my church. Like I just was like never, I was so blocked by fear. But because of the healing that God took me through, I was free. And I said, honey, if that's your dream and if that's God moving us, I'm all in 100%. And so we prayed and we asked God to show if that was his will. And he popped off like fireworks. He's like, "You're going." And so we moved. We had no jobs. We just went on faith. And it has been absolutely amazing. I feel like I'm living in paradise. And I don't just mean the actual physical beauty. I just feel like God took us on a wave of his blessing. And when I came here, I was like, God, what do you want me to do for you? Show me. And he's like, I brought you here to bless you and love you like you have never been loved. And
Wow.
I feel like, Jen, maybe you remember, I wish I'd written it down, but God, there's a scripture, and I'm living that scripture. God, he promises, he said to me, I will bring back all the years the locust have eaten. And that's what he's doing in my life. I am living my favorite time of my life. Every day is a beautiful adventure with God. I've never lived like this before. I have no depression.
Mm.
Anytime any negative thought comes, I have the power to choose God over it. And I this is like the most amazing life story. I was broken and now I'm free. And
Wow.
that's what all those songs are about. That sounds so religious, but it's true.
It is. Yeah. So
So
now you
thanks
know
for
her.
letting me share.
Well, thank you, Cam. This was so very special, and I hope everyone that was able to listen is moved and touched in their own hearts to reach out to somebody as you did, because it really was, again, celebrate recovery. God used that.
Yeah.
God can use many things, like you mentioned, therapy, a great friend, someone in your church, someone that knows God.
Mhm.
But I feel like, to not do things on our own. And if there is, somebody that is listening and they feel, maybe I need to reach out to somebody,
Mhm.
you mentioned a great resource. But you can simply pray and God will lead you, because
Yeah.
God, honestly, he's my best therapist ever.
He's a
You know,
counselor.
he really is. And God brings up wounds that I'm like, I forgot about that completely. And
Yeah.
so if you simply just pray, God, like, I really, maybe you don't know him, but you want to know him, you can just simply say the simplest prayer: God, I don't know you, but I want to know you. If what Camila is saying is true, can you show that in my life? Because I'm feeling, and then you just tell him how you feel. And there's a lot of miracles that can just start from it's like picking up a call, picking up the phone,
Yes.
call 911, you call God, and he will show up just like he did for Camila. He doesn't love Camila more than he loves me or you or anyone else. And so he is willing to be there for you at any point, at any time. And so we want to make sure that we are very clear that, why we talk about what we talk about is not just for the person that goes to church. It's actually for the person that doesn't even want to think about going to church, because we're just trying to share that God is very real. And
And he's
that,
personal.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. If you would like to reach out, you would like to ask for prayer, please email us at his hidden treasure conversations at gmail.com. Hidden treasure conversations at gmail.com. All right. What a great morning. Thank you for listening, everyone. Thank you, Jen, for being a great listener and host. I love you.
I love you.
Bye
Okay.
from Maui.
Okay. Bye.
Okay, I'm gonna stop recording. Boop.
Thank. Oh, it's still recording.
I know.